The steel walls of Redstone Maximum Security rose against the February sky like ancient fortress ramparts, their shadows stretching across the frost-covered yard. Correctional Officer Avery Mitchell tightened her new uniform jacket against the biting wind, badge gleaming with an optimism that seemed out of place against the prison's grim facade. First day. The gate officer barely glanced at her credentials, his weathered face a map of cynicism. Word of advice, in here, everyone's playing their own game. Even the ones who look like they're not playing. 2 steel gates and 3 security checkpoints later, Avery stood in Warden Claire Winter's office. The warden's silver hair and tailored suit couldn't hide the hardness in her eyes, earned from 2 decades of watching good intentions shatter against prison walls. Redstone isn't like your training facilities, Mitchell. Winter's voice cut through the room's stale air. We house the worst of the worst. Men who've turned manipulation into an art form. Men who see kindness as weakness, and weakness as an invitation. She leaned forward, eyes drilling into Avery's. The uniform you wear? To them, it's not a barrier. It's a challenge. A knock interrupted them. Senior CO Riley Cooper filled the doorway, his broad shoulders and steady gaze radiating the quiet authority of someone who'd survived countless prison shifts. Ready for the tour, Mitchell? Cooper led her through Redstone's maze of corridors, each turn revealing new aspects of the prison's complex ecosystem. Yards divided by invisible lines, he explained, gesturing through reinforced windows. North belongs to the Aryan Brotherhood. East is Mexican Mafia territory. The basketball court? Neural ground, but only during designated hours. Step wrong. You'll have a riot before you can call for backup. They passed the commissary, medical unit, and program spaces. Each area had its own protocols, its own potential risks. Cooper pointed out blind spots in camera coverage, positions that needed extra vigilance, inmates who warranted special attention. Most important thing to remember, Cooper said as they approached A Block, is that control here isn't just about locks and bars. It's about understanding the power structure, both ours and theirs. The afternoon count had just cleared when they entered A Block's day room. Inmates moved like schools of fish, groups forming and dissolving in careful patterns. But as they approached the library corner, those patterns shifted. A space had formed around one man, not from fear, but from something that looked unnervingly like respect. That's Rivers, Cooper said quietly. Dante, Ghost, Rivers. Watch how nobody gets too close unless he signals it's okay. Avery observed the inmate's fluid movements as he shelved books. Tall, lean, with an athlete's grace that his prison uniform couldn't hide. Unlike the other inmates who wore their menace-like armor, Rivers carried himself with an elegance that seemed to transcend his surroundings. Harvard-educated, Cooper continued. Ran some big investment firm before his conviction. Most inmates use muscle or threats. Rivers? He uses chess moves. Always thinking 10 steps ahead. As if sensing their attention, Rivers turned. His eyes met Avery's with unsettling intensity. Clear, intelligent, and absolutely focused. No aggression, no challenge, just pure observation. Like he was memorizing every detail of her face. Officer Mitchell, he said, his voice carrying subtle authority. Welcome to our humble institution. His slight smile suggested private amusement. I trust the academy prepared you well. Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. Not fear. Exactly. Something else. Step back from the desk, Rivers. Of course. He complied smoothly, but his eyes never left hers. I look forward to seeing you during education programs. We're always grateful for officers who understand the value of rehabilitation. The word carried weight she couldn't quite decipher. Cooper's hand on her shoulder broke the moment. Move along, Rivers. As they continued their rounds, Avery felt Rivers' gaze following her. Cooper noticed. Remember what you just saw. He never breaks rules big enough to matter. Never causes trouble we can pin on him. But nothing happens in A Block without his knowledge. Nothing. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of protocols and procedures. But that night, driving home, Avery's mind kept returning to the library corner. To those intelligent eyes that had seen through her professional facade. To that voice that suggested depths of complexity her training hadn't prepared her for. In her rearview mirror, Redstone's lights blazed against the darkening sky. Somewhere inside those walls, Dante Rivers was probably reading in his cell, patient as a spider in its web. Waiting, planning, seeing things others missed. She didn't know it then, but that first day had set something in motion. Something that would eventually shatter every rule, every protocol, every boundary between officer and inmate. The steel gates had closed behind her that morning, but a different kind of trap had just begun to close. The prison's lights hummed in their ceaseless vigil, casting shadows that held more truth than illumination. Some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. And Avery Mitchell had just taken her first step over one, even if she couldn't see it yet. 2 weeks into Redstone, Avery found herself drawn to the education center's quiet intensity. Dante Rivers sat annotating crime and punishment, his handwriting precise and elegant. Fascinating choice for a prison program, he said as she passed. Raskolnikov's theory of extraordinary men. Those who stand above conventional morality. She should have walked away. Instead, she lingered. Their literary discussions became regular, ranging from philosophy to ethics. Rivers had a gift for making complex ideas accessible, drawing other inmates into debates that stayed just within bounds. I was a teaching assistant at Harvard, he revealed one afternoon. Before Wall Street's version of crime proved more lucrative, his smile turned bitter. Until it didn't. His past emerged in fragments: prestigious education, meteoric rise in finance, devastating crash. Each revelation made him seem more human. The markets are like prison, he told her. One wrong move, and everything crashes down. Cooper noticed her increasing time there. Getting awful invested in Rivers' book club, he warned. Remember what they are. The first compromise seemed small. Extra study time. Overlooked book exchanges. Each exception had its rationale. Then came the poetry book. I noticed you watching our Byron discussion, Dante said, offering a worn volume. Protocol forbade it, but it was just educational material. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, an accident that lingered in her thoughts. His notes in the margins revealed more than literature. One underlined passage warned. The very knowledge that he was in her power seemed to give him a kind of power over her. More compromises followed. Extra library time. Overlooked conversations. Each breach justified by results. Higher GED rates, fewer incidents. You're different, Dante said during a quiet moment. You see beyond uniforms. Understand that rehabilitation needs connection. Cooper tried one last time. Rivers makes you feel special, different from other costs. That's how he gets to you. But watching Dante lead discussions, seeing respect earned through intelligence rather than violence, made it harder to see him as just another inmate. Professional barriers blurred with each passing day. Like a spider's web, some traps remain invisible until you're caught. In Redstone's shadows, Dante Rivers wove something both beautiful and deadly, and Avery Mitchell was about to learn that the most dangerous walls aren't made of steel, but of whispered poetry and broken rules. March brought rain to Redstone's walls, masking whispered conversations and forbidden steps. The education center had become Avery's refuge and prison, where professional lines blurred between bookshelves. Dante's presence grew more magnetic. During discussions, he'd lean close, voice dropping to an intimate murmur. Between what is right and what is necessary lies the shadow where we truly live, he'd read, fingers tracing words meant only for her. Cooper caught her after shift change. Rivers isn't just another educated inmate. Everything he does has purpose. She ignored the warning. That evening in the library's back corner, Dante approached like his nickname, a ghost. Standing closer than regulations allowed, just outside camera view, his arm brushed hers while reaching for a book. The contact sent electricity through her skin. Notes appeared in returned books, poetry fragments carrying hidden meanings. The supply closet became their sanctuary, inventory checks their excuse. When their hands met over a clipboard, neither pulled away. This is dangerous, she whispered. Everything worth having is. His fingers intertwined with hers. This is more than officer and inmate. Cooper's final warning fell on deaf ears. I've seen that look before. It always ends the same. With bars, badges, or blood. That night, during counts, Dante's lips brushed her fingers through the cell bars. Every professional boundary shattered. The next day in the storage room, among dusty shelves, his kiss tasted of danger and destiny. Their affair intensified like fever. Secret meetings in blind spots, stolen moments between rounds. She began changing records, adjusting cameras, expanding the education program for cover. Other officers noticed but stayed silent. Only Cooper kept warning. The phone was her final compromise. Just for emergencies, Dante said. She smuggled it in during meditation, his triumphant kiss sealing her fate. Driving home, she barely recognized her reflection. The dedicated officer was gone, replaced by someone who lived for hidden touches and justified every ethical breach with passion. She didn't see the truth, how each kiss was calculated, each touch designed to bind her closer. In her pocket, his poetry page burned. The sweetest traps are lined with desire. Somewhere in Redstone, Dante smiled in his cell, another piece of his plan perfectly placed. The web was nearly complete, each strand strengthened by kisses and promises, by passion and betrayal. She was past the point of no return. And the fall, when it came, would shatter more than just rules. April turned Redstone's exercise yard into a maze of shadows and sun, perfect cover for the secret glances between Officer Mitchell and Inmate Rivers. Their meetings had become a dangerous dance of timing and opportunity, each moment stolen between security rounds and camera sweeps. The education center's storage room became their sanctuary. 5 minutes, she'd whisper during program hours, and he'd follow shortly after. Their encounters rushed but intense. His hands in her hair, her uniform disheveled, both knowing discovery meant destruction. We need to be more careful, Avery gasped one afternoon, straightening her collar. The other inmates are watching. Dante's smile held secrets. Let them watch. They know better than to talk. His fingers traced her badge. Besides, I've made sure we're protected. She should have questioned what he meant by protection. Should have noticed how other inmates cleared paths when they walked, how conversations died when they passed. The power dynamics in A Block were shifting, but she was too lost in their secret world to see it. During dayroom hours, Dante held court among the other inmates. What looked like casual conversations were actually carefully orchestrated meetings. The phone she'd smuggled in wasn't just for their late-night calls. It was becoming a tool of influence, passed between trusted hands when officers weren't watching. Something's changing in the block, Cooper confronted her in the break room. Rivers is up to something. Inmates are too organized, too quiet. The education program is working, she defended. They're focused on improvement. Cooper's laugh was harsh. Is that what you think this is? Improvement? Wake up, Mitchell. You're being played. But she was past warnings. Their encounters grew bolder, more reckless. Quick kisses during rounds. Lingering touches during program supervision. Once, in the library's back corner, he pulled her into an embrace that could have cost them everything. You're intoxicating, he whispered against her neck. Worth every risk. Other officers began avoiding her. Conversations stopped when she entered the break room. Her isolation grew, pushing her deeper into Dante's world. Only Cooper kept trying to reach her. Remember Marcus Turner? He asked one day. CO over at State. Fell for an inmate. Thought it was love. Know where he is now? Doing 5 years for smuggling contraband. And the inmate? Already has a new CO wrapped around her finger. Avery ignored him, but that night, she noticed changes she'd been blind to before. How inmates who'd once challenged Dante now served him. How gang leaders sought his approval. How his influence had spread beyond A Block like a silent tide. The phone became a constant presence, burning in her pocket during shifts. Text messages at all hours. Calls that started with passion but turned to requests. Small ones at first. Information about guard rotations. Names of officers on different shifts. Details about security protocols. It's just to keep us safe, Dante assured her. To protect what we have. But the pressure mounted. Other inmates began approaching her with subtle threats masked as conversation. "Be a shame if someone reported those storage room meetings," one said casually. "Lucky you've got Ghost looking out for you." Their passion became tinged with desperation. Each encounter felt like it could be their last, making them more careless, more vulnerable. During one heated moment in the supply closet, they almost didn't hear approaching footsteps in time. Cooper caught her afterward, her uniform still showing signs of hasty adjustment. "You think I don't know what's happening? Think the whole facility doesn't see it? You're throwing away your career, your freedom. For what? A con who's using you like a puppet." "You don't understand," she snapped. "What we have is real. Real." Cooper's face hardened. "Look around you, Mitchell. Notice how no one meets your eyes anymore? How you're always alone on breaks. That's real. The rest? That's Rivers playing you like a master." The isolation became complete. Other officers worked around her rather than with her. Inmates watched her with knowing smiles. Even the warden's greetings grew cold. Only Dante remained, his influence growing as her world shrank. Their moments together became her only comfort, even as they grew more dangerous. One night, pressed against the storage room wall, his kisses seemed different, hungrier, more possessive. "Everything's changing," he whispered. "Soon. We won't have to hide anymore." She should have asked what he meant. Should have seen how his words echoed in the growing tension throughout the facility. But she was too far gone, too deeply entangled in his web. The next day, she caught him passing something to a known gang leader during education hours. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, his mask slipped, and she glimpsed something calculating in his gaze. But when he touched her hand later, explaining it away as necessary networking for their protection, she chose to believe him. Had to believe him. The alternative meant facing what she'd become, what she'd risked, what she'd lost. That night, driving home, she finally saw her reflection clearly. An officer who'd crossed every line, burned every bridge, destroyed every principle that once defined her. But like an addict knowing their next fix will kill them, she knew she'd be back tomorrow, seeking Dante's touch, believing his lies, helping him build something she couldn't yet see. In her pocket, the phone buzzed with his message. "Tomorrow will change everything. Trust me." The prison's lights cut through the darkness behind her, casting long shadows on the road ahead. In A block, Dante Rivers sat in his cell, each piece of his plan falling perfectly into place, while the woman who'd risked everything for him drove home to dream of stolen kisses that tasted like destruction. Neither saw Cooper watching from the control room, his report on her conduct finally finished, its damning evidence waiting for morning. The storm was coming, and no amount of passion or promises could stop it now. May brought heat that turned Redstone's concrete walls into ovens, making tempers flare and patience thin. But beneath the surface tension, something more dangerous was brewing. Avery felt it in the way inmates moved in coordinated patterns, in the silent exchanges during meal times, in the growing power that seemed to emanate from A block. Dante grew more demanding of her time, more intense in their encounters. The storage room meetings became longer, riskier. His kisses held a new urgency, as if he was racing against a clock she couldn't see. "Things are changing," he whispered against her skin. "Can you feel it? The whole system's about to transform." She was too lost in his touch to question his words, too addicted to their moments to see the signs. When he asked for information about guard rotations, she gave it freely. When he needed details about security protocols, she provided them without hesitation. "It's all for us," he assured her. "For our future." But the facility's atmosphere grew heavier with unspoken tension. Gang rivalries that had defined prison politics for years suddenly dissolved. Former enemies sat together at meals, spoke in hushed tones during yard time. The phone she'd smuggled passed from hand to hand, carrying messages she never saw. Cooper made one last attempt to warn her. "Look around you," he said, catching her after shift change. "Notice how the gang leaders all report to Rivers now? How every block follows his lead. He's building something, Mitchell. And you're helping him do it." She found Dante in the library that evening, surrounded by his inner circle. They scattered at her approach, leaving behind scraps of paper she chose not to read. "They're just study groups," he said, pulling her into the shadows between shelves. His kiss silenced her questions, his hands making her forget everything but the heat between them. Later, straightening her uniform, she noticed new faces in A block, transfers from other units, all gravitating toward Dante's influence. The education program had expanded, giving him access to inmates from every section of the prison. "Your program's success rate is impressive," Warden Winters commented during morning briefing, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "Though I'm curious about the unusual transfer requests." That night, Dante's messages grew cryptic. "Tomorrow will change everything," he texted. "Be ready. Trust me completely." She found him in their usual spot, the storage room's shadows hiding his expression. His kiss was different, hungrier, almost desperate. "After tomorrow," he breathed against her lips, "we won't have to hide anymore." "What's happening tomorrow?" she asked, but he silenced her with another kiss. "Just trust me," he whispered. "And remember, no matter what happens, what you hear, what you see, remember this moment. Remember us." His intensity should have warned her. The way other inmates watched her during evening rounds should have set off alarms. But she was too far gone, too deeply entangled in his web of promises and passion. The final pieces moved into place as night fell. Unusual movements in the yard, whispered conversations in corners, subtle signals passing between blocks. She saw it all but understood none of it, her judgment clouded by Dante's assurances. Their last meeting that night broke all protocols. She let him into the control room during shift change, his hands and lips making her forget every oath she'd sworn. "Tomorrow," he kept whispering. "Everything changes tomorrow." When she finally left him, straightening her uniform with trembling hands, she saw something in his eyes, a flash of triumph that should have warned her. But she was past warnings, past reason, past everything but the addiction of his touch. Cooper watched her exit A block, his face grim. The report on his desk detailed everything, the suspicious transfers, the unusual patterns, the growing power structure. But by morning, it would be too late. That night, driving home, Avery's phone buzzed one last time. "You've made everything possible. Tomorrow, we make history." The prison's lights blazed behind her, casting long shadows on the road ahead. In A block, Dante Rivers sat in his cell, each piece of his plan perfectly placed, while the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him drove home to dream of freedom. Neither saw the storm gathering. Neither knew that tomorrow's history would be written in chaos and betrayal. The trap was set, the players positioned, the point of no return long past. Morning would bring fire and fury. But for now, in the last quiet hours of night, Avery Mitchell clung to her delusions of love, while behind Redstone's walls, revolution waited to explode. The riot exploded during morning count with military precision. One moment, Redstone hummed with tension. The next, chaos erupted through every block. Avery stood in A block's control center, watching monitors fill with violence, when she felt his presence behind her. "Officer Mitchell." Dante's voice held none of the warmth she'd known in their hidden moments. "Thanks for making this possible." He stood flanked by armed inmates, his eyes cold with triumph. The guard rotations, security protocols, that convenient phone, love makes such an effective blind spot. Reality crashed down like breaking glass. Every touch, every whispered promise, all calculated steps in his plan. She'd been nothing but a tool, carefully positioned for this moment. "You never." The words stuck in her throat. "Loved you." His laugh was ice. "You were convenient." Eager to believe in rehabilitation, desperate for connection. The perfect combination of authority and vulnerability. Movement caught her eye, inmates taking hostages in C block. The facility was falling like dominoes, following a plan she'd unknowingly helped create. When she drew her weapon, his smile never wavered. "Going to shoot your lover, officer? What will internal affairs make of that?" The first shot came as reflex when one of his men moved. Then chaos erupted. Struggle. More shots. The taste of blood. When clarity returned, she stood alone in the control center. Dante lay by the door, her bullets in his chest, his last smile still mocking her betrayal. The investigation was brutal. Every compromised moment exposed through security footage. Text messages revealed their affair in damning detail. Cooper's testimony cut deepest. I watched Rivers work her like a master puppeteer. Every touch, every secret meeting, all calculated. And she let it happen because she thought she was special. The trial became a media spectacle. Correctional officers' deadly affair dominated headlines as every intimate detail was dissected. Security footage played in court, their hidden moments now evidence of her downfall. Officer Mitchell didn't just betray her oath, the prosecutor told the jury. She betrayed every principle of corrections. That betrayal led directly to violence, to chaos, to death. The verdict: guilty on all counts. 15 years in the same system she'd once served. They sent her across state lines to the women's facility. Standard procedure for former officers. The intake was surreal. Same questions she'd asked hundreds of times, now directed at her. Same uniform she'd worn with pride, now marking her as just another inmate. Cooper visited once, 6 months in. Rivers had done it before, he said through the visitor's glass. At 2 other facilities. Always a female officer, always the same pattern. You weren't the first. Just the most successful, from his perspective. In the prison library, she found his favorite book, Crime and Punishment. Inside, an underlined passage. We're all sometimes like children, and like children, we find pleasure in breaking the rules. She thought of herself in uniform that first day at Redstone. How sure she'd been of the lines between right and wrong. How easily they'd blurred under his skilled manipulation. Now she wore inmate gray, walked inmate steps, lived inmate hours. The ultimate price of betrayal wasn't just the years of her sentence. It was the complete dismantling of everything she'd once been. The prison lights hummed overhead, eternal and unforgiving. In the darkness of her cell, Avery Mitchell finally understood. The strongest bars weren't made of steel. They were forged from broken oaths, shattered principles, and the bitter knowledge that love, in the wrong hands, could become the deadliest weapon of all.